I think that's what it boils down to. These people had emerged, by this point, convinced at an atomic level, to the point that the only thing that was ever going to beat them was a revolutionary confrontation with people who did not have that programming, which we didn't get. And you might say, well, that's good because that would have been a nuclear war. And it's like, yeah, you could argue that as soon as the atomic bomb is developed, that the class war is over. And it's just, like you could say Skynet went self-aware at the Trinity test. Because there can be no real confrontation between capital and labor of the size sufficient to reorientate this machine away from inevitable extinction that will not trigger an instantaneous extinction. The activation of the death drive that lies dormant in the heart of capitalism under any conditions and then goes into overdrive in terminal conditions, like the fascist states of the 30s in Europe, in Japan. So first, LBJ tries to deal with this inflationary crisis by imposing limits on capital outflows in 1968. And then, and Nixon gets elected. He doesn't change that. He keeps that in force, showing that he said, as he said, we're all Keynesians now. And then in 1971, they close the gold window. They say the U.S. dollar is no longer convertible to gold, and that means no more fixed exchange rates. Now, and ever since, the exchange rate floats. You go to the board, and there's a different, you're going to get a different number depending on how their markets are doing, depending on how much capital is flowing into versus out of their economies. And this is wildly destabilizing, obviously. But it allows the United States to keep foreign capital coming in, which it needs to activate one end of the global supply circuit, while also exporting capital, which it still has to do. So the only way to do that is to unpeg the gold standard and basically print more money. Going to have to do it. But that means that to stop that inflation we were talking about, without gold there, the US dollar is going to have to be kept below a certain level of inflation. Most importantly, inflation on the dollar has to stay lower than other countries that we're trading with. They're allowed to float a higher inflation. The U.S. can't, because we're the stone weighing the whole thing down. That's imposed by, that's an artificial imposition. That's what I'm saying. These people think that is God they're serving. They think that vestigial relationship between value and and a natural object is their residual belief in the transcendental nature of capitalism. Transcendental nature of capitalism. Because you want to know why the Cold War didn't end in a nuclear war? Because the Soviets would never have done it. We would have done it. The Soviets would never have started a nuclear war. When you read about how Khrushchev was reacted to the news that the USSR had tested their first nuke successfully, he got drunk for a week, I believe is what happened. He was horrified by the prospect of that sort of global apocalypse, just wiping out the entire project of human, civilization. And that's why when the Soviet system came into terminal crisis, did they launch the nukes? No. But if this system goes into a similar crisis, will there be a launching of nukes? Absolutely. And so the question becomes, and it's going to only be answered by the end of the 70s, by the Volcker interest rate hike at the Fed, that the U.S. is going to break labor to make this happen. And that's the project. That's the federal government's project of this during this crisis period, starting specifically in the 70s, is to break labor domestically and abroad through all of its levers of power over, military, espionage and deep state intelligence structures, politics, and monetary and fiscal policy. So that's what's happening here. Is that the 70s is a long buck breaking, and these chapters talk about the buck breaking of the international left, and then the next one will be about the final buck breaking of the American left. And I mean broadly electoral left, which your combination of students and radicals and but also the closest thing to a social democratic party that exists. And the organs of the trade unions of the working class. So